Chris Rufo, the sort of anti-woke crusader. He was basically tweeting, as he frequently does. Also, I think a guest of the show, right, Zach? We had him on a
Yep,
while
yep.
ago.
hmm
Unfortunately, he,
We'll link
you
to
know,
that.
yeah. Um, he unfortunately has sort of justified the hardball that the right has been playing in order to recapture the institutions. He is basically saying the right is learning new political tactics. We're not going to indulge the fantasies of the classical liberals, of course, using sneer quotes, who forfeited all of the institutions. We're going to fight tooth and nail to recapture the regime and entrench our ideas in the public sphere. Get ready. Uh, Glenn, what do you think of this outlook and this strategy?
Well, I mean, I think this is what Chris Rufo's approach in general to activism is, and I've had him on my show. I've talked to him a fair amount before. I think he's a very shrewd and sophisticated operative. Um, but at the end of the day, I think he has a very kind of craven and principle free view of the world, which is that the only thing that really matters is the acquisition of power. Now, in his defense, if he were here, he would probably say that he believes that only because that's what the left has adopted, and that gives the
Mhm.
right only one option and one choice, which is to fight along those same lines. But the problem with it is that if you actually don't believe in any principles, and if you're only willing to do anything, if you're willing to do anything in the name of just simply acquiring power, making sure that your ideology and your ideas are dominant within these institutions, don't walk around then pretending that you believe in these principles that you clearly have no intention of adhering to, that you believe in free speech or you believe in, pluralism or anything like that, because that is not actually your agenda. I think this is the thing that I think gets lost sometimes as well. Having been somebody who kind of had a big breach with major parts of the left, with which I was once perceived as being aligned, in large part because I was so opposed to these new censorship schemes introduced primarily as a reaction to Trump, but also the rise of right wing populism in large parts of the democratic world. The uh, arguments that I was making and that a lot of conservatives were pretending to believe in was that we're preserving the values that define the United States, that define the West, that came out of the Enlightenment, which is, what the founders were most influenced by. The idea that we don't have institutions decreeing to us what is true and false. We don't have the government dictating to academic institutions what they can and can't teach, or people getting punished for the views that they are expressing. And now you have many of those same people who are embracing exactly that mentality. I think one of the most egregious things the Trump administration is doing, you read from the letter uh, written, I think the one that you highlighted was to Columbia or to Harvard.
Yeah,
I'm not sure which, but
Harvard. It
yeah,
was
to
Harvard.
Harvard.
hmm
There are two things that actually the Trump administration is doing that I don't think have gotten enough attention. One is that with respect to both Columbia and Harvard, they have demanded that the Middle East Studies Department, so this department that obviously teaches about Middle East conflict, including Israel, be put under receivership so that the curriculum is now reviewed by some third party that has to answer to the government and satisfy the government that what is being taught, and we're not talking here about third grade curriculum or eighth grade curriculum, where, of course, we expect the government to review it. We're talking about adults, universities, that the government is supposed to now be satisfied that what is being taught aligns with the government's values about these sorts of issues. But the other, even more egregious thing that the Trump administration is doing is that about a decade ago, Israel created this vastly expanded definition of anti Semitism called the IHRA definition of anti Semitism. And what it's designed to do is to make a whole variety of views about Israel essentially illegal by calling them anti Semitism. And they actually implemented them in the EU, where bigoted speech is criminalized. And so if you classify certain ideas as anti Semitic, it becomes criminalized as bigoted speech. You can't, for example, say that Israel is a racist endeavor. You can say that about any other country, but not Israel. You can't compare Israel and what they're doing in their wars to what the Nazis did. That's completely off limits. You can't say about a particular Jewish person that they seem to have more loyalty to Israel or care more about Israel than to their own country. These are ideas that are banned, that are off limits, that can be punishable by law. And what the Trump administration is now doing is forcing these colleges and universities, as a condition to receiving federal funding, to implement an expanded hate speech code, a much more robust code that is based on this narrative that we have a minority group that is unsafe, that feels unsafe because of the ideas that they're hearing. They need protection from the government, from school administrators through hate speech codes that make it illegal or punishable to express ideas that make this minority exactly the same thing that we heard from the left, that the right has been viciously mocking for a decade, that they are now embracing. And to watch, people like Chris Rufo pretend that this isn't part of the agenda, that all the Trump administration is trying to do is make sure there's no anti-white racism or anti-Asian racism in the hiring or the acceptance process, when in fact it's much, much broader than that. That I think is what's so disingenuous and so dangerous, because even though there was an attempt by sort of Western liberalism to impose a censorship regime, and in a lot of ways it did succeed on the internet through calling it disinformation and hate speech. What's going on now has the full force of the United States government and the laws of the United States government behind it. And that's why I regard it as such a serious escalation. And it's being cheered by the exact same people who spent the last decade pretending to despise and fear all of these sorts of things.